Let's talk about small N designs, which are probably a design that some of you have already done in your work sites or will do early on in your career. So we've talked primarily about large N designs. Participants are grouped. We're looking at group data and group means and confidence intervals. We want large samples so that we can develop precise estimates of our, sample statistics. And it can be both basic research and applied. In small N designs, each participant is treated separately. Data is presented separately for each individual. We're comparing treatment and control periods for each individual. And often it's used in treatment to demonstrate, whether that treatment was successful. So with case studies, which is a special kind of small N design, one of the famous kinds of case studies in psychology is Jean Piaget's research, where he was actually using his children as a way of developing an understanding of cognitive development for children. And very influential. Right? Now, people have come in later and said, well, maybe this, maybe that, we could handle this differently. But certainly good foundation here. Much of our understanding of schizophrenia and its genetic basis occurred through our understanding of the Genane quadruplets, who were studied intensively over a number of years, long number of years by NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health. And, with the Genane quadruplets, we had identical quads, and yet their expression of schizophrenia was different for each one. HM, that's how I first knew him, because his name was kept private. He's now known as Henry Molaison. Suffered from very debilitating epileptic seizures. And in order to reduce those seizures, there was, his neurosurgeon removed the front half of the hippocampus. Following that, Brenda Milner and Carolyn Scoville, entered and did an intensive study of Henry Molaison, who had good long-term memory, remembered where he was living when he was 14, but each day had to, introduced himself to Brenda Milner, even though he had worked with her for a long period of time. Now, what's interesting is, despite these problems in memory, his IQ seems, if anything, to have gone up. Personality was stable. And he did seem to learn some things across time, although may not have been able to verbalize what he learned. So considerable understanding of the neurological bases of human memory as a result of this work. And clearly not something we'd want to do in an experimental design for obvious ethical reasons. Second kind of small N research is called stable baseline. In here, we have a researcher observing the behavior for an extended baseline period before the intervention. So your book talks about Ms. S, who has Alzheimer's. During the baseline period, she's recalling very few words. The expanded rehearsal appears to be to significantly increase the number of words that she's able to remember. And again, think about what recommendations you would draw based on this. These are data from me. I was trying to increase the amount of writing that I engaged in. And in the fall semester, you can see that I was writing almost nothing. In the spring semester, I was teaching a behavior analysis kind of course and had to report weekly about what kinds of things I had learned or, how my writing was. And you can see when I had to make a report to the class, I was writing almost every day. Just so you recognize, this is when I was out of town. And in 2000, I didn't take my laptop with me when I traveled. Third kind of small N research is multiple baseline design. In this case, the interventions are staggered across situations, times, or contexts. So, for example, in this study of children with autism who also had a phobia of dogs, you can see that each child, John, Sally, and Bob, began at different places or different times, and that it became clear that there was significant distancing from the dog initially. This dropped during the desensitization period and was generalized to 2 new dogs. Sally wasn't as phobic initially, but you can see that she responded well, and we also had good generalization. And similarly with Bob. The fact that we have 3 different, or that the baselines are at different places, helps us to to exclude some kinds of other factors, including excluding maturational and history that are threats to internal validity. Think about what recommendations you would make based on this. This was from a study of open pit mining, and they were trying to change the safety behaviors of the miners and reduce the number of accidents. And again, we have baseline period in both of these places at 2 different mines with considerably reduced number of accidents across time. So again, with each of these, if I were the mining company, I would be saying, this intervention makes a difference. I'm going to continue doing this. Final example that I want to talk about is reversal design. So here we're observing a behavior both before treatment, during treatment, and then removing the treatment to see whether the behavior reverts back. This is a case where the person being studied has some really difficult problems with rumination. In this case, we're not talking about ruminating thoughts, but we're talking about actually swallowing and regurgitating foods. And what they wanted to do is to determine whether the behavior would generalize across time. So we have a series of baseline periods and treatment periods. And clearly, this person responded well to the treatment, but you can see that there was at least a partial relapse during the baseline periods. And that's an important piece of information to have if you are talking about making behavior change with a person. And probably what I would recommend is that that we continue the treatment across time. Maybe what we want to do is begin to spread out the reinforcement periods, so a leaner reinforcement schedule. But we can't, at this point, remove the reinforcement completely. Now, we talked about Jane Elliott's Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes work before. One of the things that's interesting in terms of what she did is initially she came in and she said, here's what we found out about blue eyes. And she made her intervention. She treated blue-eyed and brown-eyed children differently. And then the next day she came in and said, oh my goodness, I got that wrong. It's brown eyes. Okay, and so she did a partial reversal. And what she saw is that the children responded to the treatment that they were experiencing. Very telling picture of prejudice. I have another study for you. This is an article that was published in 2022, where the authors were looking or found two identical twins raised apart, one in China, one in South Korea, I'm sorry, and the other in the US. They completed, once they found them, they completed a series of different kinds of assessments and identified that there were some places that that these adults were now different. So the South Korean child had a considerably higher intelligence or IQ score. That child also had more collectivist values, but they were more similar personality-wise. They're also very different kinds of family environments. The one in South Korea was raised in a much more supportive family, where the US raised child was raised in a much more conflictual environment. So, small n, think about what you would conclude from these data, and also what kinds of confounds might limit your conclusions. And why might the researchers have chosen this particular design? And think about what design this is. And take care. Bye-bye.